Hello everyone, my name is Nico. I'm an assistant professor at UNC Chapel Hill. In my lab, we develop optical instrumentation for neurosciences, and like many of you, I often need to use digital micromirror devices to go about my own research. There are commercially available devices that are pretty expensive, and in many cases, and many of our colleagues understand that, you need a DMD display that is not necessarily the highest performance level. A few frames per second is sufficient for what you want to do. And in which case, a very inexpensive option is to basically repurpose the DMD that is already present in commercially available video projectors. So in today's video, we're going to take a video projector, disassemble it, take out the DMD chip, and then reassemble it partially so that we can control the DMD chip with the HDMI input of the device.
Hi everyone, my name is Vincent Curtis. I'm a PhD student in Dr. Bugard's lab, and today I'm going to show you how to disassemble this thing. Alright, so first you gotta take this thing, turn it around, and you'll see there are several screws here. So we're just gonna remove those real quick. Alright, so one important tip is to save these because eventually you're gonna put this back together, and you want that to be a pretty easy process. So one more thing to note, sometimes there are hidden screws. It's not just these guys. Sometimes they could be hidden under labels. That's not the case for this one. But what is that if you take off these little things, you'll see additional holes where screws are. So then you want to take your screwdriver again and remove those. So now that you have most of your screws out, you want to take off this panel here and you'll expose what is the battery of the machine. And that should just come out. Pop it like that. It's got this little connector here, but that's also pretty easy to pull out. You can just actually take your fingers and pull. So once you've removed all the screws and the battery, it should just pop out like that. So here are all the various points of interest in this nice circuit board here. We have our speaker. We have several fans that are responsible for cooling a lot of the main circuitry. Our actual DMD is here attached or glued here. And what you want to do is start just disconnecting a lot of these things as we go. So we're going to disconnect the fan. A lot of these smaller ones you can just pop out pretty easily. Disconnect fans over here. And something of interest here is this is actually a heat sensor responsible for kind of a closed loop system. It senses the temperature in the unit, and then these fans will respond to keep everything cool. We'll remove these guys as well. These are the LEDs. This is where the DMD is connected to the board. We can see a little bit of paste here, so it's sometimes better to loosen it a bit before we try to pry it up. So when you're making these cuts or when you're wedging the DMD, try to keep the pressure off the actual circuit board. Next, we're going to want to wedge the board out. It's good to start from this end here where this little port is. And we are going to take it out like that. And there are also a lot of components here that are kind of holding it in place. So you want to make sure that it's free from those. And there we are. All right, so now we're gonna kind of remove any loose, unnecessary components like these speakers here and start disassembling the main kind of optical part. So we're gonna take out this focusing wheel here, and then we're gonna unscrew the main screws holding the optics to the bottom of the board, and we'll be able to see what's inside. So and there we have it. So we've dislodged most of the main optics here, and now we can go through and remove these screws to see everything else. Okay, so next step, we're gonna take out all of these screws along the top, as well as these screws here. All right, so next we want to go through and scrape off this rubber so we can pull out the rest of the top. You'll scrape around the whole perimeter, and eventually when you scrape enough, you should be able to wedge the device. Another thing to note is that you want to be especially careful when you're reaching this connector. You don't want to end up kinking it or damaging it in any way. We've made it to a critical area. Like I said earlier, you really don't want to hit this connector, so we're just gonna pry it up, holding the screwdriver, pulling it towards us. And there we are, now our connector is free. And the rest of it kind of just pulls off. So we can see all the lovely optics inside.
All right, so our DMD is right here. So in this version, what we're gonna do is we're gonna take out just the DMD and separate it entirely from the rest of the optics. So I'm gonna go from the back and remove the DMD chip. So we have two screws here. And that part has to be done quite carefully. So this is a spring that holds the DMD pressed against the surface and goes through the heatsink. That is a piece of rubber. And below it is another spring that holds the DMD chip itself. 4 screws there. We're going to preciously keep. Then we have this other metal spring that holds everything pressed against the surface that we pop out because it's also buried in glue. So that this guy. Pop it out exactly like we did for the cover. Going under and then lifting. So if you're under here, you follow here and then you twist your screwdriver. And it's going to basically loosen the glue on one side and on the other. Probably will bend the screw, but we can always reform that. So up, bend the screw up entirely out. And then now we have a little PCB board that holds everything pressed against the DMD, the holder. So we loosen that as well. Screwdriver. Smaller screwdriver. This glue that needs to be loosened. Not every chip is easy to get out, but you want to be as far away from the electronics as you can. So this chip presses the connectors. Here. Presses the connectors against the DMD. Up. That's the part that we want to preserve very carefully. And that's our DMD with yet another layer of rubber against it. The DMD is right here, so we can just lift the rubber. And if we do everything well, the DMD comes right in our hands. Right here. Up. And so there's a little like notch here that's different size on the other side. So when we put it back, we can have a bare DMD surface available to us. So what we're gonna do is remove that prism right here. So you go from the other side, and there is like rubber that is being like glued right here. And if you take just a screwdriver and push across, you'll see that your mirror slides out nicely. You can actually just slide it from both hands and keep it. So that's our mirror here. And up. There you go. That's our mirror. And now we have basically the bare surface that is right here. That's got this injection molded plastic that can hold the DMD really well. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut with a saw just that piece of plastic and keep it as a holder for our DMD. So for that, you can stop the So the DMD goes back in first. That's the chip that we want to keep. And then this thing in the way. The connector that must be pressed against the DMD goes next. And it's going to be this orientation right here. Alright, pressing against the DMD for good contact. the rubber piece that holds the whole thing together comes in next. This one goes like this. And it presses against the DMD. So we're going to rebolt it back using the screws that we spared. Find probably. All right, let's keep going. So we put back the spring that presses against the DMD. So one screw right here. A total of 4 screws. Alright, that puts pressure holding it down. And our last step is to put on this heatsink that presses against everything else. And there we go. So we have now our DMD reassembled, facing outwards, with the connector intact, and the heatsink in the back. So for convenience, what we're going to do is just like cut an opening in this board right here to access the DMD and disconnect it if needed while the whole thing gets reclosed. So we cut a hole right here, and we put the cover back in place. And that way we have a little platform and access to the connector. And we put back all the screws to hold the board in place. Alright, so this is the box reassembled, and we have the connector for the DMD right here. And what we're going to do is just replug the module that we isolated back in place. So we're going to push it down here.
It was saying something.
Connected, and now we have our DMD right here. And if you plug it back in, turn it on, you see that the DMD is now displaying patterns, and we can just reconnect the HDMI ports. Now, an important fact is that not every video projector will let you disconnect the LEDs, and so you might have to disconnect the LEDs and have them just shine their light somewhere in the box away from the DMD, because some of the boards will detect that the LEDs are disconnected and go into a fault mode. Alright, so this is our DMD. You can see the image right here displaying the backsplash of the system.